Morning all. An amazing encounter yesterday, much anticipated, between Magnus Carlsen playing white and Nakamura playing black. Both of these players are Twitter friendly, and we see some of the more competitive sides maybe of Twitter, as Nakamura commented at some point that Magnus Carlsen was like Sauron and he was the one who was to take him out. But I'm not sure that was meant in any negative way. I think it was in a positive sense that Sauron from Lord of the Rings was all-seeing, and I think it was a compliment, and it might have been taken the wrong way. And anyway, so there's this background stuff going on between the two players, which makes their games even more interesting. I think this hype between matches happens a lot in boxing, but they're managing to do it in chess, so credit to both of them for hyping up the game. So Magnus playing white chose actually d4, and he hasn't ever lost to Nakamura yet, but their last encounter he was on the verge of losing. There were many different moves which could have won for Naka, but he managed to choose the one move which lost, so it's a bit of a tragedy in their previous encounter. And now Nakamura, unfortunately, in this game with the black pieces, is going to make any idea of winning usually more difficult at this level. So let's see what opening he chose. So d5, just classical for the moment, and we have the Slav defense. And now knight f3 from Magnus, knight f6, e3. This is quite a modest move actually. Knight c3 on my live is more popular overall. So e3 blocking in the bishop for the moment, but providing support immediately for the pawn. Bishop f5. And in this position you might be interested actually that although knight c3, that's the most popular move played, c takes has also been played in bishop d3. So this bishop, challenging this bishop, it's not a new concept to challenge the bishop at this point here. That's been seen before. But for the moment Magnus played knight c3. And now Naka played a6. Often e6 is also employed here. Now usually here on live, but bishop d3 is actually played to challenge the bishop. An interesting little finesse though now, which has been played 27 times before, is just bishop e2, and it's very, very interesting, this little finesse. You'll note that black has weakened some dark squares with this a6. I mean, it provides functionality for b5, but it's weakened some dark squares. And this next move by Naka on the other side also weakens some dark squares. Pardon me, light squares here. We've got some weakened dark squares here and some weakened light squares here. So these weaknesses are quite interesting to consider for what pieces are going to remain on later, what pieces will be useful, what pieces to trade. In this particular position now, and we've already gone off the rails. Usually white would follow up with bishop e2 with queen b3 here, and there's only 6 games though I've got on this. Queen b3 looking at b7, and you would have this strange idea. So with the rook on a7 it looks awkward, but apparently this is meant to be equal, this position. The rook a7 justifies while holding b7, which is a downside of the bishop coming out. The bishop looks nice on the diagonal. So this awkward setup, apparently it's about equal here. But we see now that instead of queen b3, Magnus chose actually bishop d3, and this kind of breaks the principle about moving a piece too many times in the opening, or more than once, trying to just castle quickly. But there's a very specific reason that the light squares have been weakened. It's more logical to try and trade that off now. So in a way it's a slight improvement from white's perspective for bishop d3 without with black having committed to h6. Pawns do not go backwards. That's the fundamental thing. These pawns are never going to go backwards. They weaken squares. So trading off now is interesting, but it seems to leave white with a bishop with pawns, quite a lot of pawns on the same colour as this bishop if black did exchange. Now what can black do apart from exchange? Well, I think bishop g4 might be considered, but white still is just trying for a tiny advantage from the opening. and we'll put on the kibitzer here. Is it actually worth black to try and play bishop g4, for example? Well, it's a different game. I think this bishop is quite nice now on the diagonal anyway, and it will actually be more effective with the inclusion, with the insertion of h6. So I don't think white would worry here about even playing just h3, and just this position would actually be quite nice. There's more light squares for the bishop to make use of. So a very, very interesting concept already, really, this delayed bishop e2 and then bishop d3. Very specific reason about weaknesses. So let's see what happens now. Bishop takes d3, queen takes, and now e6. So most of the pawns on light squares. White castles. And here, another interesting decision strategically. You might think bishop d6 looks fairly normal for the bishop to go there, but actually bishop b4 was played. It seems Naka is keen to just get rid of one of white's knights. The knights can do quite a bit of damage on the dark squares here, potentially. The c5 and e5 squares in particular look quite ripe for later knight outposts. So it's a very interesting decision. On bishop d6, say bishop d2, we could have a look at this position with a quick e4. I think this is another point of bishop b4, by the way, to try and discourage this e4. This kind of position would be a slight advantage to white. So okay, bishop b4, trying to discourage this e4. So bishop d2 was played, and now black castled. Rook f d1 now. And white is actually potentially got knight takes d5 with a knight takes f6 trick, so it would actually force knight takes d5 in return. Just to show that, if knight d7, knight bd7, knight takes d5, here actually knight takes d5. This is slightly better for white, because there's another trick even in this position, not recapturing here but playing d takes, and this would leave white significantly better. So this is actually a little threat in the position for knight takes d5 coming up here. Knight takes d5. So a normal move could be punished with knight takes d5. So does the bishop want to go back? Well, we'd still have that e4 break if the bishop goes back. That's not going anywhere, and that's kind of thematic in the position, and that will be quite pleasant for white. So black committed to taking on c3. Bishop takes c3. Now, at first, when I was looking at this game yesterday, I thought, well, isn't it less fun for white to play without the light square bishop? Maybe in one regard it is a little bit, but black hasn't got his dark square bishop, and is actually, in that respect, it looks a little bit like a Dutch defence where black is weak on the dark squares and white has usually aims to swap the dark square bishop to weaken these squares for the knights. But here white has the dark square bishop and black has these dark square weaknesses. But you'd assume that without the light square bishop, white might be slightly weaker on the light squares, so e4 and c4. So a very, very interesting position strategically has emerged here. Will white be able to exploit the dark squares? Will black the light squares? Knight bd7, and now b3, able to tuck the bishop in now, if needed, to knight e4. There was also, of course, an option if knight e4 immediately, if white wanted to preserve the bishop, well, there's actually a couple, bishop b4, or even maybe bishop e1 is a bit radical if white wants to preserve that dark square bishop. But anyway, so b3 gives some options and support for the c4 pawn as well. So we see now queen e7, rook ac1. So white's position looks coordinated and solid, and you see that the dark square bishop is also inhibiting e5 here. So there's a bit of a grip on the dark squares already. But white will need to start manoeuvring to intensify pressure on the dark squares. We see queen e2, so vacating the d3 square now means this kind of manoeuvre, intensifying the pressure on the dark squares, is on the cards. Knight e4, bishop b2, rook fd8, now knight e1, and also this facilitates kicking the knight, of course. The knight actually goes back voluntarily, and there's an opportunity for a pin, an annoying pin, which is made use of. And it's here, this is very interesting at move 18. It seems some commentators on certain sites like ChessGames.com were wondering about this next move from Naka. It looks a little bit on the reckless side in some respects. Black played f5, pawns do not go backwards, and it seems sometimes these kind of exciting pawn structures or aggressive advances sometimes do backfire on Naka, and they do give him this reputation that this is like an inherent weakness. He's trying to win with blacks, maybe too much. We saw a lot of players with black trying to win in the recent candidates with aggressive pawn structures, and often it did backfire. But that's the nature of such aggression in terms of pawn structure. You can see a lot of pawns are being moved in this game, but it really needs a very, very strong player to exploit these perceived weaknesses here on the dark squares. We see knight d3. This looks like a very thematic maneuver in, say, the Dutch defence, but white has that dark square bishop, knight f6, but black has a good grip on the e4 square at the moment. Now bishop b4 is played. That's a very, very interesting move. Where is this bishop going? Is it going to e1 in the new circumstances? Well, maybe that's a new option. It's very difficult for black to kick that bishop away without further weakening his position. He unpins with queen c7, and now the engine suggests f3. Even though black has seemingly a good lock on the e4 square, it seems f3 might be a good try for an advantage here. So say knight f7. Pardon me, knight f7. Let's follow this through. This position, the bishop can tuck over here and actually maybe use this diagonal. So it's not just about preparing e4, but this kind of position. You can see that white, even if e4 is not actually played, this bishop could be a nuisance on the dark squares over here. So it's quite interesting how it can zigzag through and look at different dark square weaknesses in black's position. But f3. Yeah, could have been useful for that regard. But Magnus actually doesn't commit the f pawn. He plays queen f3, and this still looks at tantalizing black on the dark squares with moves like this. So these dark squares look a little bit sensitive. Now Naka commits to d takes c4, and technically this move, it looks as though it's releasing some central tension. And technically, the engine evaluation did go up ever so slightly on this move, so we could perceive it as a small technical issue. The engine suggests just knight f7 and keep this formation quite solid, more solid. On any c takes d as a test, I think on e takes, there's queen takes f5, so knight takes d5, but this might actually be this. Apparently it keeps the technical evaluation quite minimal. So if you look at this, e4 has been discouraged. The knight looks quite good there, and maybe this is another way of playing the position with moves like even like f4 here to try and bite at white's pawn chain. So white's not looking that solid equally, and it looks technically about equal here, believe it or not. So this next move, from an engine perspective, looks like a little bit of an inaccuracy to play d takes c4. It seems white is even more comfortable here, just ever so slightly more comfortable with either taking on c4 or even bishop takes d6 then taking on c4. But Magnus preserves the bishop, so black's concede a little bit more of the centre here, and now plays knight f7. So the idea, I guess, is to break with e5, and that's kind of thematic to try and at some point. But at the moment, queen takes f5 is on, so either c5 or e5 to prepare c5 or e5, like with b6 and c5, to try and put pressure on white's centre. We see a4, and positionally there seems to be a slight threat of a5 just to create that grip on the dark square b6. a5 stops that, but it is a target for the bishop, a fixed target, and the bishop now doesn't go here. It keeps staring at that weakness on a5 from e1. So white has a comfortable position here. We're talking 0.6 now, the evaluation for white, according to Houdini, almost approaching 0.6. So that's almost like more than half a pawn. b6, and now Magnus plays queen g3. So he doesn't mind the queens coming off here. And if the queen doesn't come, you know, if the queen avoids that, then this queen looks like a wonderful piece on the dark squares. And in fact, c5 is quite annoying, and the pawn structure is at risk here. These two pawns, it looks like terrible. There's going to be potentially a backward pawn, weaken this even more. This queen can't be tolerated here. Any attempt to kick it off, just white's gaining a tempo there, and it's all over. This is virtually completely lost. So the queen just exchanges now. So queen takes g3, h takes g3, and we see white's position. He got this threat now of c5 to try and leave this pawn backward to further weaken this, to undermine this pawn chain here. So c5 is on the cards, and very, very dangerous. So rook a8, bit of a passive move, but necessary, because now if c5 here, then b5 becomes possible, because that a5 is being held by the rook, and this will be just about okay. It's maybe slightly better for white, but just about okay. So Magnus doesn't pursue c5 right here. He keeps the tension going with f3. So he's introducing the idea of just getting the king nearer the center, or other ideas maybe of e4 when black's not prepared. If the knight ever moves, then maybe even bishop f2 and e4. So there's lots of options here for either c5, gaining king in the center, making use of e4 or g4 at the right time later. The tension has been built up on both sides of the board by Magnus. Rook db8 is played. And now, instead of, after rook c2, what is Magnus really up to? Well, with rook c2, there's the flexibility to double rooks like this on the poor b pawn, which is a backward pawn, and it has been locked down by these two pawns. So here, the freeing, black tries to free his position immediately with b5, and now Magnus, of course, just slips into that weakness on c5. So he's looking at e6 now as well. There's pressure on e6, there's pressure here. It's looking to be slightly dodgy, black's position. The engines suggest here, technically, the way to play this would be to play b4, believe it or not, letting e6 drop. So a very dynamic idea, but this is a protected passed pawn here, so maybe this is interesting. Knight takes e6, say rook a7. So what would be black's idea? Well, maybe counterplay a little, in inverted commas, on e3 could be evident. Say like this, knight d7. If this knight could be removed, basically black has got interesting compensation here. The bishop seems to be locked down a bit as well by this this structure. So that was quite interesting to consider, it seems, from a technical point of view. The idea of playing b4. This b takes c4 looks to leave black structure more of like a wreck. You know, these fractured pawns everywhere. On knight takes e6 here, let's have a look. Knight takes e6 here, then knight d5, and black is actually well in the game here, it seems, technically. After bishop f2, knight d6, that would totally justify black's play. So black seems to be doing much better if that happened. So forget knight takes e6. Magnus just played here rook takes c4, and now after knight d5, so looking at e3, Magnus just protects this with bishop d2. So e6 is still for the taking, and that's now moved here, e5. White has still preserved a small advantage. There's more structural damage over here. The pawn structure, it seems to be changing very rapidly in this game. Every few moves there seems to be a structural change in black's pawn structure. we see e4 kicking the knight from its nice central perch. And funny enough, here, well, if the knight just went to e7, okay, e takes, this apparently is very nice for white, and d takes, even though the knights look quite active, this position apparently is quite good, because actually the position's opened up for the bishop if you look at this, and it looks as though the knight's very nice and difficult to dislodge. White's got very nice rooks here. This looks quite uncomfortable for black. So in fact, after e4, the knight didn't just go back, just f takes, and this leaves a very nice knight here, which cannot be easily kicked away. There's no f5 or d5 to ever kick this knight away from e4. So it's a bit of a pain there. A beautifully centralized knight. Fractured pawn structure, and the pawn structure is rapidly evolving in this game. But it seems, you know, if white can absorb black's dynamic compensation, then structurally he'll be better. But white is not without targets. Knight b6 hitting a4. So swapping c6 now for a4 potentially. The engine does suggest an immediate knight takes a4, but this was inserted instead, knight d8, which might be a slight inaccuracy. The engine actually prefers knight takes a4 here. Knight d8 was inserted, and Magnus comes up with what seems to be a very, very strong move here, probably one of the top engine choices. Well, either rook d6 apparently or rook g6 are quite annoying for black. Let's see, so Magnus actually chooses rook g6. The point here is not, by the way, bishop takes, because there's always king h7 at the moment. That's not the point. Here, if knight takes a4, just d takes e5 is strong for white. And then this is actually on the cards potentially, because there's other tactics going on. So rook g6, with the idea d takes e5 if knight takes a4. Knight c4 is played. So what on earth is going on here? Well, the a pawn has been left. I mean, that would have given black a fast outside pass pawn. So why didn't he go for that? Why has black played like this? Let's just rewind for a moment. If knight takes a4 was played here, what was the concern? Well, d takes e5, knight takes, rook c7 looks a bit scary with the rook on the 7th. With bishop f4 on the cards and then potentially doubling rooks, that's often decisive to get both rooks to the 7th. Couldn't black say challenge the rook? Then actually tactically bishop takes a5. So maybe this is the sort of stuff that Nakamura was worried about. This is horrible that black is losing that pawn anyway. It's not really a magnificent passed pawn, and it would leave white with that bishop is even more effective because the position has been blown wide open here. So this is definitely an improvement for white. This is even more of an advantage. So that's interesting. That in a way it seems black has pursued some complications here with knight d8 and knight c4, but they seem to be justified a little bit. D takes e5. So now king h7. If knight takes e5, let's have a quick look at knight takes e5. Rook d6. With the idea of bishop c3, this looks like there's going to be coordination at some point on g7 once the knight moves. So okay, after d takes, king h7 was played, and now rook g4. And there's a threat now of knight g5 check to win the knight on c4. Knight takes e5, rook h4, and it looks as though bishop c3, and if the rook can get to the d7 it will be end of game. This knight will have things like knight f6 or knight g5 later. It looks as though black's king safety is in question here. Knight d f7, bishop c3. So this bishop does seem to be quite strong now. White's advantage has grown significantly to nearly +2 here, believe it or not. This is now nearly +2, 1.83 for white from an engine perspective. So something has gone badly wrong with black. I don't know it seems from certain structural issues, with the pawn structures changing so rapidly in this game, but Magnus seems to have navigated to let this bishop seemingly be a very, very dangerous piece, and black's knights having to protect each other here in a sort of passive manner. Rook b3, rook d5, putting pressure on the e5 knight, and now putting pressure on the other knight as well. But black seems to be overloaded. The a5 pawn is on the card for munching here, and in fact here it is munched, so white's now got this passed a pawn instead of black having a passed a pawn. Knight g6, the rook moves. You can see in all this knight perched centrally on e4 just removes a lot of black's potential counterplay, and black seems to be a bit aimless here, trying to generate some pressure, some counterplay, but does it really exist? White doesn't mind trading off the knight for the bishop, so outside passed pawn is a major trump card. The knight on e4 is another major trump card. The rooks seem quite dangerous. This extra pawn over here might not appear that significant because they're double, but it keeps the knight out of dangerous squares. So if there's any rook to the 7th, it doesn't seem as dangerous. So these help reduce black's counterplay. We see rook a3, rook cc5, stopping even knight e5 now. Rook a2, at least there's a rook on the 7th. King h2, the king is heading somewhere. Where? What was black actually? Was black actually doing anything? Not really. White's just improving his position. Okay, there might be some potential coordination like this to be wary of. Rook a6. Now, if a rook did come down here, it looks as though intuitively black's king might be put under scrutiny. If rook d1, I think that is the case. Rook c7, and I don't think there's time. This helps justify king h2. If rook here, then knight f6 splat, and black is the one getting mated. So I don't think there's any time for trying to attack white. Black's king is actually in many ways weaker. So knight e7, and now g4, keeping the knight out of f5. Well, you might think there's the d5 square. Is there? Let's have a quick look. Knight d5 wasn't played. The engine suggests that might be a move, knight d5. King g3, keeping knight out of f4, and if knight e3 here, then this actually doesn't matter. Rook c3, and black will be too loose here, be losing material. So black can't really go for white's king here with knight d5, it seems. Although this is a suggestion from the engine to play knight d5 here. So black looks to be in a bad spot here, with white building up his position and even ready to dissolve the double pawn and weaken black's king even more with g5. So rook b7 was played, rook b5, keeping the rook out like that, and it's neatly protecting this other rook, so that doesn't do anything. Rook c7, trying to maybe generate some play with rook c1 potentially, but now that's stopped here with knight c5. And with a5 now on the cards, white's building up that passed pawn. It's going to be more significant. Rook c6, conceding an exchange of rooks. But what else is black doing here? It's in a bit of a bad way with a5 on the way. And white can just start dragging the a pawn if nothing else. So rook c6, conceding a pair of rooks. Can black do anything in this ending? Rook b7. The knight's holding that pawn usefully and also preparing knight e6, sometimes knight e6 now, to win that g7 pawn. Knight d4 stops knight e6 and threatens knight takes f3. Magnus spots that, funny enough, with king h3. Now we see king g8, rook b4. I think this is almost in technique territory at this level, because black is 2 pawns down. Knight e2. And now Magnus dissolves his double pawns with a temporary pawn sack, vacates g4 for his king. Black's position looks hopeless after king g3. It doesn't even have to use king g4 here. If h takes g5 in this position, that wasn't played, then just knight e4 is a nice way of collecting that pawn, and also threatening rook b8 mates, by the way. So if g4 here, f4, and we can slowly just white can slowly just get this pawn at leisure later. So this is pretty dire. black tried knight e2 check after king g4. Now the king is ready to just simply recapture. After h takes, king takes, knight g1 hitting g2 again. Just rook g4 here now was played, and with king g6 on the cards, and it's looking horrible, this position. Black actually resigned, so it is really 2 pawns up. The double pawns have been dissolved. So let's see if black continued with, say, king f7. How would white actually try and win this? Say king f5, and now with knight e6 on the cards, this is pretty dangerous. For example, rook d2. Now knight e6, rook d5 is a nuisance, so king e5. This pawn is just making progress though, potentially. So rook b2, and these pawns, it's just slowly winning. It's without much counterplay from black. So yeah, black threw in the towel here. This game is very, very interesting. It seems black was tantalized into rapidly changing his pawn structure. Every few moves there was like a different pawn structure change, and black's pawn structure seems to be getting minced actually, because if we go back, you know, these fractures here are quite painful on a5, c6 and e6. It is looking quite painful with the bishop eyeing on a5. It just looks like a very uncomfortable position. So if black wanted a more secure structure, the opportunity was missed here with the tactical opportunity with b4. It would also keep the bishop out, but maybe that was a lesser evil choice to play b4. It just seems to be going quite rapidly downhill with these choices. And this other one here, a lesser evil might apparently have been knight takes a4, but then black seems to go technically more downhill now after this. And here, actually, king h7, the engine suggests, just kicking the rook immediately for knight c4 as an improvement, by the way. So knight c4 here with tempo would have been a major improvement, it seems, if black wanted to play knight c4. What is actually where does actually the rook go? Actually, this is important enough to have pointed out earlier, but this would have been an improvement on that instead of the immediate knight c4. It seems. So yeah, here it seems now this is in white's favour. It just became massively in white's favour. Profound stuff from Magnus Carlsen. He just seems to be always increasing the advantage every few moves until it became gigantic in the endgame. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.